Okay, welcome back to our next interview with Ask an Archer. We're very happy and honored to have a person who's been quite tricky to get hold of. He's a very busy guy. Anyone in the traditional archery world will know about him, Peter Dekker. Thank you very much, Peter, for taking your time out.
Yeah, nice to be here, finally.
Yes, yes, there's been a lot of back and forth.
Yeah.
So we'll, a very brief intro to yourself, Peter. I mean, people who may not have come across you yet or starting to know about you. You have, or what you let us know a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go over some of the sites that you have running at the moment. Like what led you into traditional Eastern archery and then Manchu archery?
Yeah, it started a long time ago. I think we can blame bad 1980s martial arts movies for the initial interest in martial arts, which has been, I think, a lifelong passion. But my interest moved from first the martial art itself, then to the weapons. So I was trained to swing around this floppy wushu sword. And then I went to China and I actually saw some antique swords. I'm like, wow, these are nothing like the swords I'm training with. So how historical is this art? And that made me interested in, okay, if this is not real, then what is real? And that interest led me eventually to the Manchus, who founded the Qing dynasty, and their swords first. But then whatever they wrote about themselves, the bow was always central. And the saber was just a sideshow, like, yeah, we carry it, but, whatever. So I'm like, okay, if this bow is that important to them, then I want to know something about it. And I went to China for study, half a year in Beijing. And Yang Fuxi lived there.
Was that study because of your interest in the martial arts, or something separate? You were going there anyway?
Yeah, it was actually for a business school. So Chinese language and culture. Right. And then with a business angle. That was more, I wanted to become a sinologist, actually. But then I was thinking, what do sinologists do? And I thought maybe business.
What is a sinologist?
Yeah, an expert on China. And they usually comment on things, and they write papers. But it's pretty hard to be like a real successful sinologist, because there are many of them and they all have their own fields. So then I was like, maybe business is for me better, more practical. But in the end, I ended up working in culture entirely anyway. So
excellent.
Yeah, but I used that time to get to know Yang Fuxi, and he at the time was making Manchu bows, but they weren't really like the antiques I was studying.
Yeah.
So I had him make a bow, and when I put it next to an antique bow, the ears were too short. So then I have this bow with me.
Yeah.
This is a glass fiber bow made by Yang Fuxi in 2005.
Right.
And I completely stripped it. And then me and a friend, Philip Tam, made these ears exactly the size of an antique ear. And then we glued it on with a lot of tape. And this was actually the first working Manchu bow, because there was nothing like it. And the horn bows Yang Fuxi made were not really shooters at the time. They were more like wall hangers.
Right.
So I started training with this and starting to find out are there any manuals that teach you how to shoot this style?
When you when you glued the sears on, did you have a little bit of knowledge of how to do that already? And was it like traditional glue or like modern glue or what?
No, this was just epoxy, and then first we wrapped it with just rope. But it wasn't that strong, so eventually we put it on again with stronger glue, and now this is just plastic tape basically. It's not a very heavy bow, so it held, but it's far from a good bow.
Excellent.
But at least it had the long draw length, and it gave that let-off effect that Manchu bows are now so known for.
Yes.
So that got me into it, and then eventually I convinced a Korean maker to make a Manchu bow. This is one of the bows they made, I think, around 2008. Starting to look a little bit more like it, because at the time nobody was making anything like it. So the longest ear you could get was a traditional Mongolian bow. So these bows really started it, and then because I was on the forum of Stephen Selby, ATARN.
Yeah.
people from the forum got invited to this archery festival in Korea.
Yes.
And that's where things started to go quick, because there I met a lot of people that are big names now, like Hillary Greenland, Jaap Koppendraaier, like a lot of names that became quite big in the later scene were there. So it was really nice to see that whatever I was doing was not that strange, and there were also other people out there doing their own projects. And suddenly I felt like there was this community that this was also before Facebook.
That's right. Yeah, I think one of the other people that I interviewed. I mean, I've had the fortune of interviewing those people already, and they were saying it's nice to know that sometimes you feel you're in the corner of the world somewhere in your own little niche, and no one knows about you. But then when you do come together, then you kind of join like a wider family of traditional archery, which is good. We will come back to the idea of the long C as the long ears on a Manchu bow, and what makes a good Manchu bow as well. What I wanted to first do is just share some of the sites that you have so people can check them out. So this is your current manchuarchery.org site. I know you said it hasn't necessarily been updated, but there's a lot of good information on here. Very interesting. At the beginning, you said you really poured your heart and soul into the site, and you even quit your day job in 2016, right?
Yeah.
So that really shows commitment. And there's a lot of information and articles on here, so people can check this out as well. So before 2016, what was your work at that time?
At the time, I was handling the social media accounts of this big real estate company in Holland. So basically, whenever somebody had a problem with us and were tweeting about it, I was the one to solve it.
Right. Okay. You're doing damage control.
Yeah, basically. And it was quite interesting to first learn corporate social media within a big website, because it taught me a lot about what can be done if you use social media, right? Well, now I'm 40, so I'm getting rusty and old now. Like whatever young people come up with sites and platforms, I don't know them. Right. But at least in the beginning, it gave me a fairly solid base to translate what's actually a very old and dusty profession into something that looks relatively nice online, I hope.
Definitely. Yeah, no, you've done a very good job with this site, and it covers so many different topics and people. So we really, encourage people to check out the site. A bit later on, I do want to talk about the last Manchu archer and your meeting with him as well. So then you moved on to this, your current work, I guess, Mandarin Mansion, which is basically trading in antiques. So just tell us a little bit how you got into this and what type of stuff that you kind of handle.
Yeah, my interest started mainly with swords. I think in the 1980s already. I was quite young when I was already swinging around fake swords, and then at some point my first reproduction sharp sword. So swords, edge weapons have always been an interest, and mainly Chinese. But at some point, the Chinese were buying up so many Chinese arms that the prices went through the roof. And also there's not that much preserved in China. So naturally I was looking to expand. So as you can see on the website, I do some Indian arms now, Nepalese, like the, and it was actually refreshing to have to look at different cultures and apply the same principles of research. So what are the historical sources, which traveler has been there, who wrote about it, things like that. And so that's now my day job. It's actually an excuse for me to be able to research antiques like all day without having to worry about an actual job. So I like the research a lot more than the selling, actually. So if
well, they say, if your work is your hobby, it's not really work, right? So it's
that's
just
correct.
You're doing your hobby full time, which is excellent, and also it's good for the traditional archery community, because someone like yourself who's very productive, can get things put out there, produced well, and researched correctly. One of the things that Stephen Selby, I was talking to him about, I said, look, what would you like to see in the future in terms of the archery, traditional archery world? He said he would just like to see more well researched articles and documents, and just generally good research stuff, so that people can put it out there, because there's a lot of stuff out there which is not really that thorough. Would you kind of agree with that?
Yeah. I think back in the day when Stephen Selby set up this forum, it was like this hideout for very serious researchers and craftsmen that finally found each other. And I feel now the community has become more of a lot of people that just want to shoot an Asian style. And they Google something, and if they didn't find something within 10 minutes of Googling, then it doesn't exist. They don't really pick up an old manual or an old text or start translating away. So I think it's also to do with the scene becoming a little bit mature. So in the beginning, you absolutely need pioneers because there's nothing. And now you can actually just leisurely take a bow and, you know, don't be too much into history. But I agree with Stephen that I would like to see more of the historical research as well.
Yeah. Now you've really handled some amazing pieces here. We're just looking through some of these swords. What, obviously without naming names or whatever, but what type of clientele do you sell to? Are they just all collectors, or just super rich people who just want like a nice sword to hang on their wall or something?
The clients are fairly diverse. I do a lot of Asian arms, mostly Asian arms, and I see that the clientele is also mostly Asian people. So, for example, I have a lot of Indian clients in the UK and in America, and these are usually second or third generation Indians. So, the first generation has been busy with trying to prove themselves in a new country, you know, become a doctor or a lawyer or something.
Of course, yeah.
And then at some point, their kids or the kids of their kids, they start to wonder, like, but what's our culture? And then now they're well off. They've proven themselves in the new culture they live in, and now they want to do something about their traditional culture. And many of them start collecting. Many, you know, the ones I speak to, it's probably a small percentage.
Yeah.
So a lot of my clients are actually Asian people that now live in Western countries and make the kind of money that they can afford it. But what I also appreciate are clients just like how I was maybe 20 years ago, people that really save up for something, like they save up for months to buy one sword. And they're usually really fun to deal with because they really do a lot of research before they buy something. Well, some rich people are just like, oh yeah, I'll take this one, I'll take that one, I'll take that one.
Just because it looks nice.
And for business, those people are, great, of course. But the people that really look forward to buying the next piece and they follow up with a lot of questions. It's that's really nice.
Yeah, I guess it's nicer to sell to people who actually have an actual interest in the item, and you know that they're going to take care of it, you know, very well.
Yeah,
and appreciate it.
Yeah. Some of these clients are really your dream clients that also sometimes they come up with something new that I didn't know, and hey, have you seen this picture or this text?
Excellent.
Yeah.
And I guess finding these items, how challenging is that to come across these? And do you have to travel far now for them, or do you just speak to people online and kind of have your contacts that way?
Yeah, when I just started, I thought finding these pieces would be my biggest challenge, but actually it's not so hard once you're in it full time, I've noticed. So my sources are mostly other dealers, collectors who want to sell some of their collection to buy something new, or old collectors that are retired from collecting and want to build up some pension. Those are generally the best sources because they already have taste, and what they have now is maybe the result of 30 years of collecting. So you're gonna have the best they found in all that time. Sometimes but I try to keep that to a minimum because I don't want to snatch things away from the public market that much, you know, in front of my clients and then try to sell it to them for more a month later. It's but sometimes there's something on an auction that I think is undervalued or underappreciated, and then I'm like, I want this piece so I can research it and write about it, and hopefully whatever I find out is worth the extra money I now have to charge for the research.
Sure. I mean, some amazing weapons here, and like you say, it gives you the chance of handling it actually even for a few weeks or a few months, looking at it, you know, measuring it, weighing it, etc., etc. I saw somewhere, it might be on this site, but you had one of the bows, you had actually measurements of each part of the bow as well. which was
Yeah.
very interesting. Okay, let's go on to, so when I put out that, you know, I'd be able to interview, I sometimes ask people to let me know what questions they would ask. So we're going to just try and go through a couple of them. And this is actually, one of them is from Bede, actually, Bede Dwyer, who's an old friend of yours, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, if we talk about heavy bows, he was saying he would like you to elaborate and give some more details. So, example, what was the training like in the maybe the Qing dynasty or in different dynasties of Chinese tradition? How did they test the archers, and how do we know that let's say 100-pound bow today would equal, you know, the equivalent in the time of the Manchu?
Yeah. Yeah, the Manchu period is, I think, great to research because they left so much material. So I literally have tens of thousands of pages in PDF, like scans of old documents
Great.
that cover anything from building the bows up to how many grams of sinew, how many grams of glue, the cost of the glue or the sinew, how many hours each craftsman spends.
Wow.
A lot of travel accounts, foreigners that went there, missionaries that wrote about practices. So we have a fairly complete image of what there was. The first question, how they trained for these weights, that is still a little bit of a mystery. And also it's hard to separate what each training was for, because they were training to be like an all-round warrior. And part of that was to be a good wrestler, a good horseman, spearman, saber, bow. One of the things they did was they lift up like this big granite piece of stone with two handles, and it was actually a piece that they could put next to a horse to easily get on a horse. At least that's how it originated. Later they just became stone weights, and they would pull them up, and according to a British traveler that went through Manchuria, he saw soldiers lifting this stone up, and it was about 100 kilos, and
Wow.
swing it to the other guy who caught it, and then swing it to the other guy who caught it, and they
Wow,
were in a group.
really?
Yeah, you can imagine what it
Like a
does to all
ball.
your tendons. Yeah, and to your tendons and muscles. So
Oh gosh.
it must work really hard on your core and everything. So, but when you look at old wrestling manuals, this is also in the wrestling training, because you want to be able to move this weight efficiently.
Right.
So it's hard to say was the specific archery training, wrestling training, or all-around strength training. I think the latter.
Just conditioning, general conditioning, probably.
Yeah. For bows, they had a whole range of bows. The standard bows went up to 240 pounds.
Wow.
And you often read in text that you should shoot about half of what you can pull. And 160 pounds was the minimum if you were an outsider and you want to become a soldier. You had to go through this exam, and you couldn't become a soldier if you couldn't pull 160.
Oh gosh.
So then, for those people, 80 would be easy, and 80 was deemed enough, according to a degree of emperor.
Yeah.
So, and we've seen in testing what 80 does. It's an 80-pound Manchu has a little bit over the impact of a 130-pound longbow. So it isn't enough.
quite an impact. Do you know the rough ages of what age would soldiers be admitted into the ranks? For example, we know with the Sipahi soldiers or people in the Janissaries, some of them were quite young, maybe 14, 15 or something like that. Do you have any information about the Manchu soldiers?
I don't have specific ages, but the Manchus were born in this, like a warrior caste. So they this exam to join the military. They were born in a family that was military from the beginning. So they would typically start training from age 5, something like that. But I don't know what the youngest age was for deployment actually in the field.
But presumably, if they have to be able to pull these heavy bows, I mean, you've got to be at least over, I don't know, 18 or 20, at least, something like that.
Yeah, you think, but a friend of mine, his son actually started also when he was 6, and when this guy was 12, he was still small. He could already pull 100 pounds. So
Wow.
if you start young enough, yeah,
Yes,
you
true.
can actually.
Yeah. I guess
Yeah,
the breed of
it's funny because me.
the army breed back then is probably different to the breed now.
Yeah. With our weak office hands. Yeah.
Exactly, soft
Yeah,
hands.
there was
Yeah.
even one account of this guy in his 80s who passed the exam,
Wow.
and so he had to pull this 160-pound bow, but also do a form with a pole arm that was 60 kilos and some other training.
Yeah.
And then the emperor was actually angry at the officers who let him through because they said, "Well, it's impressive that he can do it, but he will never make a good soldier. He's too old." But I found it a very interesting account. Like, wow, this guy had trained for it and actually made it
Yeah.
in his 80s.
Amazing,
Yeah.
amazing. So we still have a we still have a chance, Peter. We still have a chance.
Yeah, yeah, apparently. Yeah.
The
And the funny thing is,
the Manchu. Sorry to interrupt you. The Manchu Chinese, are they pure breed Chinese? Are they a mix or anything like that? Did they come from outside, or they're just one particular kind of dynasty in the Chinese history?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. A lot of people think of them as really a race of people, especially among Manchu nationalists today. But actually, they were not a race, but an identity. So at the end of the Ming Dynasty, the Ming was quite corrupt, and there was one local Manchu leader, or actually he was a Jurchen leader, and his father and grandfather got killed, and this is what lit the fuse for them to become rebellious. So of course, there were a lot of other things going on that was already leading to that reaction, but this was the last one. And they were the Zhenzhou Jurchen. This was a kind of a culture group that did a lot of hunting and gathering. But within a decade, he had about 60,000 soldiers, and a lot of them were not Jurchen anymore. There were Mongols among them, Koreans, Chinese.
Okay.
And to unite this group, in 1636, he said, "Let's call this group Manchu now. We share this identity." And this group actually went to invade China. So they were already a mixed bunch before they even crossed the wall. Yeah, and then during the Qing Dynasty,
what does Manchu mean?
They're not sure, but I think it points to the god of wisdom in Tibetan Buddhism.
Okay.
Yeah, the Manjurisha, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But they're not 100% sure where the name comes from. But it seems likely because at the time most of them were Tibetan Buddhists.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you before. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when the Qing continued, you had this also Chinese bannermen and Mongol bannermen, and then when the Qing fell, the new regime also put all these bannermen under the Manchu class, basically, because they thought they were similar in status in society. So after 1912, even more people were Manchu. And then in the 80s, you had these special programs for people that could get benefits in schooling if they were of an ethnic minority. And corrupt officials actually sold Manchu-ness to people. So a lot of people became Manchu then because it benefited them in society. So of the people now who say they're Manchu, it's very murky who is and who is not, because most of the family histories have been burned. So it's a bit of a loose identity, yeah. Because after the fall of the Qing, a lot of Manchus, of course, were afraid because anybody closely associated to the old regime was in danger, in potential danger. So they sold their robes, they sold their weapons, they burned their family histories, and many of them pretended to be Chinese and went through life like that.
I see.
So the culture went end.
So when it was cool to be Manchu, we were Manchu. But then when it didn't work out for us, then we changed our identity. What was the how does the Manchu archery differ if we're talking about specific techniques now? What was the tactical principle of Manchu archery in battle?
The tactical principle was mainly based on the hunt. So their basic culture was old Jurchen culture. And surprisingly, they didn't do a lot of agriculture even up to the 16th century. So their main income was hunting and selling pelts of animals and things like that. And what they would do is they would encircle the game and close the circle and then close in and shoot them. When they were in war, they did exactly the same, which meant if you have a group of musketeers, because they were the last major culture that bring archery to the field like that. So even the Mongols already were relying on muskets mostly. So if you have these musketeers and you surround them, they have to shoot in all directions instead of having one body to aim at. So it was actually surprisingly effective against armies like that.
Okay, interesting. So the Manchu were actually still using traditional weapons against, you know, kind of the modern weapon of that time, which was a musket. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And are there records of them actually winning battles?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they made China much larger than it ever was. They won battle after battle. So the first major battle was 60,000 Manchus against 200,000 Chinese.
Wow.
And they massacred them in about 3 days.
Wow.
Half of the men were lost of the opposing side. And lost means like didn't return. So a lot of them probably deserted, like, you know, let's leave it.
Forget this.
But but it shows the military power they had, and this was mainly because shooting the bow was in their daily life, and in the closer to the modern world, people lived in cities, and the soldiers only trained like so many hours a week with the musket. And if you're then against an army that is shooting to kill every day for food, they have quite an advantage.
You're gonna be quite skilled. Now, so at that time, it's again like you've mentioned, the Manchu were not part of China, but they were fighting the Chinese. They had to be skilled. Number one, were they known for horseback archery as well, or was it all ground archery?
Mostly from the horse.
Okay.
But they also did it from the ground wherever the horse wasn't effective. So in the mountains, for example, they would dismount.
Yeah. Right. And what? Yes, go on. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, in the 18th century, they actually had special units to cross rough terrain by foot or with little boats on very fast rivers. Yeah.
Sure. So, in those type of battles, the Manchu are using the bow like you just showed us. What were the Chinese using? Because when we think of, you know, Chinese bow, we think of, I guess, what the Manchu bow looks like, right? Were they using something different?
There are records from the late Ming in the north that they were using a bow that is very much like the Manchu bow. It's called the Da Shao Gong, and it could actually be a Manchu bow. So it seems some of these troops saw the effectiveness of it and were like, maybe we should also have some of it.
Yeah.
But the majority of troops were musketeers at the time, so early firearms.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Another question about the draw technique of the Manchu. So presumably they're using thumb. Do you have any maybe thumb rings there or anything that you can show us and how they would have used that?
Yeah, I do actually.
Please, yeah.
So this is the typical Manchu ring. It's just like a cylinder. And everybody knows, or most people know the thumb draw with the lip ring. This is the most common ring in Asia, used in India, the Ottomans, the Koreans, Ming China. And you just slip it on like that. And you have to align it before you use it. The Manchu ring is different. So you don't have to align it, you just slip it on. And you can wear it all the time. You can even handle the saber while wearing it. I
actually asked, I think I was speaking to Justin, maybe, you know, when you have a ring that's circular, sometimes it can pop off. So how is it that this one stays on? Does it sit between the joints or something?
Yeah, it's all down to technique and fit. It needs to fit very well. So it's hard to do it with a ring that's even 0.5 millimeter too big. So the fit is super important. What I do, I don't slide it all the way down, but a little bit above, and then I bend the thumb, so it's quite stuck. And normally you would do this and then lock it like that, but with this ring you can actually just twist in. So as you can see, I don't even need to lock it. And to shoot, you just twist out like that.
Right. Okay. Right.
Yeah. So it's this twisting motion instead of
Yes.
the opening motion.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it takes a lot of getting used to, especially with heavier weights. I've cursed the ring at some point, like sometimes it's shot with the arrow, but after some training, you slowly get the hang of it, and then the release can be crisper than this ring. But also, it's ideal to have a long bow, so the angle here is not too steep. So
yes,
this
right,
is
not
quite a
too
short
tight.
bow, and it's
Yes.
split all the way. So you have a tight angle, and then you actually have more friction to the ring than with a ring like
Right.
this.
Yeah.
So,
Because there's more surface area on the Manchu ring where the string is touching, right?
Yeah. So it's best for a huge bow like the Manchu.
Got you.
And actually, what's funny is that if you look at the glove for Kyudo, this is exactly where the ridge is. So the technique is the same as Kyudo. It's just a different device.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I guess that would help speed shooting because you even those extra couple of milliseconds where you're having to lock your thumb, you don't need to do that now. You can just hook and pull, right?
It could be quite fast. Although what's interesting is that you don't have any records of speed shooting among the Manchus, and they never carried a lot of arrows. So it wasn't as much of a focal point for them as for other cultures. And this is probably because their arrows are.
Yeah, so speed shooting wasn't a big thing. It was more about accuracy.
Yeah, because their arrows were about 100 grams, so 30 arrows is 3 kilos already.
Yeah.
So
quite
an Ottoman archer, for example, there are records that they could carry about 90 arrows. So then speed shooting becomes more relevant. But with only 30 arrows, you don't want to shoot them all in a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also you don't want to waste arrows, so you have to really make sure every arrow counts. Are there any records of what feats of accuracy that the Manchu did? Like, for example, in Ottomans they would be able to maybe shoot through a bottom of a glass or do certain things. Is there anything like that in the Manchu history?
The most common account you find is hunting animals and beating them in their own game. So if it's a fleeing animal, you chase it in the gallop. And one of the hardest things to hit was a hare. So they would actually chase the hare so it runs, and they chase the hare with the horse and then kill it with one shot.
Wow!
And if you can do that, then the soldier becomes really easy. Yeah. So that's speed. And another is they had this target with a little loose thing inside and all these rings around it, the Tunken target. And the emperor, for example, would shoot it at about 30 meters. And I've made a target like this. And the interesting thing is that normally when you test accuracy, if the point hits the center, you have a point. It doesn't matter the alignment of the arrow. But in order to go through armor, for example, the arrow has to be dead straight. So with this arrow, with this target, you test the cleanness of release accuracy. And it's pretty difficult to get this long Manchu arrow, it's a meter long, through that little hole without touching any of the other rings. So that's also one of the training.
Right, I see. So it shouldn't make any noise or anything. It should go right through. Yeah,
so if the tail hits one of the rings, they will all fall out. The target will explode, basically.
Wow, okay, all right. Yeah. That's pretty difficult,
Yeah.
And then what about, so you talked about the arrows. Do you have any example of some Manchu arrows there? I can see some arrows behind you. I'm not sure. Are they the Manchu style ones?
Yeah, those are reproductions, the ones I shoot.
Okay.
And some old ones.
If you just kind of go through what they're made of and the tips and things like that.
It's a bit scruffy, but this is a standard Manchu target arrow with a standard target head. And this is made by a friend of mine, McGain, who has a shop in the Netherlands that sells arrows. And it's a replica of an arrow. I think I have one. I'll check. Here's an old one and the head is actually a replica of this head. It's a very sturdy target head with the long tang that goes up until here. So, and this is wrapped with sinew and bark and big feathers.
Excellent. Wow, those feathers are like what, 7, 8 inches or something? Longer maybe.
Inches, yeah, they're longer. They're about 35 centimeters on this one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's full.
pretty
Yeah.
long.
Now, I mean, although the feathers have a very low profile, which helps for flying through the air, because they're so long, does it not create a lot of drag as well?
Yeah, it does. So you see that in the beginning of the dynasty, the arrows are relatively short because they're shooting quite long distances. This time, the examination is at 128 meters.
Wow.
And in the end of the dynasty, the examination was only, I think, 40 meters, around that. And I think it reflects that the Qing itself also started to use more and more firearms. So the bows got specialized at closer and closer ranges.
Right.
So this, as a target arrow, I think, looking at it, this is useful for maybe up to maybe 60 meters.
Sure.
It won't, you have too much of an arc when you shoot further than that.
Yeah, of course.
It's purely a sports arrow. And you see the war arrows, even up until the end, had shorter feathers.
Yes.
This is only, this might be 20 centimeters, something like that. About 8, 9 inch. Yeah.
And the material, the wood for the shaft, is it the different types of woods, the local woods they would use, or is it bamboo or what?
Never bamboo for some reason. Well, it was plenty, of course.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I've made bamboo arrows and they never flew well for a Manchu bow. I think there's something about the weight and stiffness that's just not suitable.
Right.
So it's all wood, usually very dense wood. So I've encountered, in text at least, birch, poplar, alder, willow. This I think is some type of birch. But the problem with the challenge with these texts is that they didn't have a strict classification of species like we have after Linnaeus. So you have Yangmu, which could be a couple of trees. Some of them are evergreens, others are like like normal trees. I don't know how to call it, but so sometimes when you see like Yangmu, you're not quite sure which kind of wood it is. So you have to get it from the context. Look into accounts like what grew in the area.
Would the arrows be? Are they parallel or are they tapered?
They usually taper at least a little, from here to just in front of the feathers. This is usually the thickest part, and then they taper down again to rather thin near the nock. And what I think this does is that it clears the bow. It makes this movement, and if this is thin, there's less chance of the tail hitting the handle. So whenever I made arrows for my Manchu bows, they only started to fly really well when they were really close to the originals.
Yeah. What type of, I guess, are they just using experience and eye to taper it and make sure that all the arrows are the same? Are there any specific tools you think they would use to help taper arrows?
Yeah, there was this guy in the 1930s that visited the shop, an arrow making shop. So he describes the whole process, and they usually did this with cutting tools, so planes and scrapers. And then the final finish was with a plant that they call horsehair, which I found is still used today by instrument makers. It's some kind of polishing, a leaf that has polishing qualities. Yeah.
Interesting. And would they be lacquered or protected or covered in any way?
Mostly not. I think this treatment with this horse leaf already kind of makes it smooth and closes the grain. Some of the arrows might have had an oil treatment, so especially arrows for hunting water animals would be covered in, I think it was goose fat that I've read. Lacquer is almost never seen except on the end between the feathers. and this is probably to protect there's this silk thread that holds the feather.
Okay, yeah. So they've wound the silk thread round to hold the feathers on. Yeah.
Yeah, this is very common for war arrows.
Mm.
You never see it on more expensive target arrows. And I guess because these had to last in all conditions on campaign, and these were just used at the local club, and if it was raining, people just stayed inside and drank tea or something.
Yeah, sure. What can you tell us about? Okay, do you have a Manchu quiver?
Yeah, I have several actually behind
Okay,
me.
just show us a couple of those, please. And did they have quivers for arrows and bows, or just arrows?
For both. So
Okay.
you see, this is a bow case. Yeah, it's like a holster for a pistol, but then for their massive bow. This is typical chin quiver of the first half of the 19th century, and it has these pillows inside, and the arrows go in between. And then normally you have like a wing nut, but in this case it's rawhide that they pull through to tighten it. Then it has these extra pockets here for arrows with big heads, usually whistling arrows or big hunting heads. And what's interesting with this one, it still has the bell, which is very rare. And you can see how it was suspended. So normally when people reproduce these, they only see these two from the front, but there's always a third connection that counterbalances it. And then when you put it on, it just stays straight like that. Like
Right. Okay. So yeah. So that helps it stay still, even if you're on a horse or running or something. It stays still.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I believe I did an interview with Zach from Nomad Arts in Canada. He makes the quivers, and I think he made similar ones. So, but that's an authentic one, right? That's a old one, right? Amazing. So in a quiver, an archer has actually a number of different type of arrows, and he has to know when to use the different arrows.
Yeah. The normal soldier could choose between two heads. So you have the normal warhead. It's like this. And you have a slightly broader head. And it was free for them to choose what they take. And you see some of the best archers would only take the war arrows because they fly a little bit further. But the broadheads would do more damage at close distance. So you could use them against horses or people with no armor. So often you see like 3 of these special arrows, and the rest is all war arrows. It was a little bit different for these guys. This is a parade quiver. Right. For somebody who would accompany the emperor to ride outside the Forbidden City. And then they would have 5 war arrows, 5 broadheads, a signal arrow, a rabbit hunting arrow, and a normal hunting arrow. Oh. And this was for to go hunting on the way to the summer palace or things like that. So it depended a little bit on.
Yeah, so the difference in the arrow, so you said a signal arrow, is that the whistling arrow?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's purely just to let off a signal and notify people of something, right? And then the rabbit hunting arrow, is that has like a blunt thing on the end to kind of shock the rabbit, or does it have something that will actually kill it straight away?
Yeah, I'm looking. I don't have any here. I think they're in a box, but it's basically a tip with prongs like that. And if you have a rabbit, at least a hunter told me that rabbits, they often shoot with buckshot, because if you have a single bullet, it goes through, the rabbit usually can still run. And these prongs actually deliver a nerve overload, so you kill it instantly. And it's quite interesting that today you have these the judo points, they call them, which are a little bit like, and it's funny to see that they're very much like these 18th century Manchu heads. And I think the inventor of the judo point didn't even know the Manchu head, but they just came to the similar design because it was just practical. But it's quite a big thing with prongs. So you really need a pocket like that to fit it.
Yeah, of course, it's quite big. Yeah. Okay, so on to the if we're talking about the bow itself with the long ears, what purpose? Because different bows, when they're made differently, obviously it gives a different performance to the bow. What did the long ears, the long seers give to the Manchu bow that other bows didn't have?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. Let me get a bow. This is a nice old one. This was probably once around 100 pounds. And you can see here it has these massive ears. What it does basically, it's a lever that helps bend this. So if you have this at 100 pounds, you can bend a whole lot of mass here. If you would cut off the bow here, this might have been maybe a 250 or 300 pound bow, and nobody would be able to pull it. Yeah, so this actually helps the archer pull an inhumanely thick limb here. But it's not just advantages, it's also a huge, big, heavy thing, of course. So what it cannot do is accelerate really quickly. So it makes a slower bow that has a lot of power, which is excellent for shooting very large arrows at moderate speeds. So when we tested a Korean bow of 90 pounds against a Manchu bow that was 82 pounds, we noticed that with a light arrow, the Manchu bow was absolute rubbish. Lots of hand shock, and the arrow didn't go very fast. The Korean bow was superior, but once you put a heavy arrow on the Korean bow, it didn't have this mass here. So the Korean bow went down in speed quickly. Manchu actually shot the heavy arrow faster than the Korean bow could.
Interesting.
So that's what it does.
I mean, so it's like with anything, you need to have the right tuning for the bow and the arrow. If you have something that's too weak or too stiff, obviously it's not going to fly. So with a heavy bow like that, you need something heavy so it can really push it forward.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny that with a lot of testing, when people had these bows, even Sexton Pope had a bow like this, and he wrote about it. And he expected a lot because it was, I think, also almost 100 pounds and so huge. And he was already used to Turkish bows. And he used a normal arrow, and he was disappointed. He's like, yeah, bows are rubbish, and they're a stupid design, and the Chinese can't do anything. And the funny thing is that since the Qing fell, actually, people have been shooting it with the wrong arrows, thinking it was rubbish. Up until maybe 50 years ago, when we started to find out, like, hey, if you put a really, really heavy arrow on it, there's no bow that shoots that particular arrow faster than the Manchu can. Yeah. That's where the strength. Yeah.
Have you met any kind of traditional bow makers who have like a line of teachers that, you know, kind of an unbroken chain of teacher student type of thing?
Not for the Qing. No, there's Yang Fuxi. So he's considered the last bowyer in Beijing, but he didn't learn the entire profession. And at some point he became quite famous, and the demand really went up. So he was just cramming out bows. But there's a lot of young people that didn't have this kind of tutelage that have been outperforming him now.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So my bows are made by a friend from Taiwan, and they could have fooled me. Like, his bows are so good that if you put them in an antique market, I would think it's a very well preserved 17th century bow. Everything is exactly like the originals.
Is it by any chance Yuhua Zhang? Is it this guy from Taiwan?
No, it's Wenche.
Someone else. Okay, someone else. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I recently did an interview with Yuhua, and he's also in Taiwan, so I thought maybe it's him. But
yeah,
I mean, his bows are also quite amazing.
Yeah, he makes good bows. Only he's not specialized at Manchu,
No.
And Huang Wenqie, he's almost only making Manchu bows. So yeah,
does he speak English?
yeah, he does actually. He's in the
Okay.
ATARN group as well. Yeah.
Okay. Perhaps you can put me in touch with him. I can see if he's up
Yeah,
for an interview or something. That would be very interesting. Then we can
yeah.
get more into the detail about Manchu bow and things like that.
Mm.
Okay, heavy bows. How would, especially those long, heavy bows, how would they be strung? Because especially if they have quite a curve unstrung, how would they be using any type of rope or anything to string them?
Yeah, you would have gongnaatse, it's called. I have them downstairs, but basically what you do is you have a bench and you tie this down to the bench and you put a wooden block here and then you bend it over the block and then tie it up and then the other side and then you have them both bent and then you can put the string on and then remove the blocks. And some of these really heavy bows were much more difficult to string than they were to pull, because in stringing you pull from knee to knee, so you don't have the advantage of these levers yet. So yeah, they're quite something to
I
string.
can imagine that's quite difficult. But what would happen in a practical situation in war or something? Let's say the string breaks, for example. I mean, it's going to be near impossible to string that unless you have help with someone else, maybe.
Yeah, the good thing about these is if they're strung for a while and they unstring, they do keep this form just a little while. So if it's freshly unstrung, I can string well, maybe up to 80 pounds I could string with my legs. But if it's in this deep sea after like 2 days of relaxation, then I really need the tools again. So I think back in the day they would be able to do it because they must have been quite a bit stronger than me. Unless, because you also had like guys who shot 160. If their string broke, I don't know if they could string it themselves.
Yeah, be quite
Maybe they
difficult.
would just have to ride back and get a bow.
Yeah, possibly, because we hear stories of different archers from different civilizations and cultures being able to even string the bow on the horse as well.
Yeah, I've read about that. Yeah, it's mind-boggling to me. But on the other hand, like if you see, I don't know, a Cirque du Soleil act, and you describe it 200 years later, people will think like, ah, nobody can do that.
Exactly, that's true.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So maybe with a lot of training, people were capable of feats like that. I would love to go back in time and see some of these best archers do their stuff. It must be amazing.
For sure. Yeah. Well, actually, that's one of the questions I'll ask you a bit later on, but we'll leave that for the end. Okay. How were the horses trained for horseback archery, and how were the horse archers themselves trained? Do you know anything about that?
The Manchus were trained from childhood to be good riders. It was part of their culture. But as the dynasty progressed, they settled into a more and more luxurious lifestyle because they were now the conquest elite. So in the 19th century, there's a lot of complaints of Manchus that actually couldn't ride that well anymore, or that had not even been on a horse.
Wow.
So it really depends on which time period you're talking about. But if you're talking about the elite archers in the 17th and 18th century, really the height of their military power, they were just born in families that rode horses. And the interesting thing that I read, there was this diary of a 17th century Manchu soldier. And he never wrote, "Get my horse." He always wrote, "Get me a horse from the herd." And there was always a horde of horses following the army. And he would always get a horse. And I think it attests to the skill they had, that they could just get any horse and perform. It didn't matter to them. So I wonder whether these horses were actually specifically trained for military purposes. Maybe they were, but at least in the war, nobody had their own horse that they used every day.
Yeah. Do you know anything about the type of breed of horse they have? For example, the Mongolian pack horse is known to be very small but strong and sturdy. Nowadays, the I guess Turks, they would be favoring the Arabian horse, racing horses. What type of horses did they have in the Manchu army?
Mainly the Mongolian ponies. Yeah, they were very fast, very hardy. And I'm not a very good horseman, but when I lived in Beijing, I used to go to Inner Mongolia to ride horses there. And I found them to be a very stable platform. They have a gallop that is much more stable than a normal horse. So
Yeah,
I
that's
could
right.
understand
I
when
think that's
riding.
something to do with them being a bit smaller, so their legs not so long, so it's more like cruising when you're
Yeah,
in the gallop. Yeah.
yeah, and they're very fast, and they're very good at endurance. So they're actually
Well suited.
uh, yeah. In the beginning, when Western observers came there and Mongolian people said, "Oh, you need to give us your thoroughbreds and continue in this horse because your horse wouldn't make it."
Yeah.
They're like, "Yeah, they're trying to steal our good horses and give that." So some of these travelers actually didn't switch, and then their horse died on the steppe because it was really hard to find food that was nutritious enough for these good horses.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting that in this area you really have to have that horse if you even want to survive.
Yeah. I mean, the horse is your lifeline really in that type of
Yeah,
environment. You know,
yeah,
much like the camel in the desert. You know, they call it the ship of the desert because it can store
yeah,
water and meat and everything. But in the steppes or in China, I mean, your horse is really your life really.
yeah.
Okay, there's you have someone on your. I'm just gonna go to the website of, where is it now? Okay, Manchu Archery. So this guy, is this the? So I heard from Murat Osvari that you met an elderly man who was a guard troop in the Emperor army or something. Is this the same guy or is it someone else?
Oh, this is it's a woman actually, but
Ah,
she is indeed the daughter of an imperial guard to the last emperor of China. Uh,
wow. Okay,
so her
tell us
father,
about that.
yeah, her father was Tong Zhongyi, and apparently back in the day when you were an imperial guard, you were also a medic. So he was a chiropractor for the emperor, because the imperial guard would always accompany the emperor. So if something was wrong with him, they also had to be able to treat him medically. So in their family history, there's always been a medical line, which in this case was chiropractic, and the martial line. So he was one of the last all-around martial artists. He did wrestling, and he was a champion wrestler. He was a very good archer, both with the normal bow and the pellet bow. He handled the spear, the sword. He was a horseman. And she was trained only in a fraction of these arts because he already said in the new world, there's no place anymore for these arts. So he told her, I'm going to teach you archery and wrestling. And she became a wrestling champion in China. And she
Oh,
won the
amazing.
last, yeah, and she became the last archery champion in, what was it again? I think it was 1948 or 58.
Oh.
She won the last tournament that was done with traditional bows. After that, they switched to Olympic equipment. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And you met her, obviously she had probably retired from all of that and she was much older. When did you meet her?
Yeah, she was in her 80s, and she was in Singapore. The funny thing, one of these festivals in Korea, I went to 3, I think. I was standing there in my full Manchu outfit with my Manchu bow, and someone came up to me from Malaysia who is running an archery school there. And Sheikh Fuad is his name, really nice guy.
Yeah, we know Sheikh Fuad,
And he
yes.
said, like, yeah. And he said, like, yeah, I went to a chiropractor in Singapore, and she had a photo of someone dressed like you, and she said it was her when she was young. And from that moment on, I was like, I need to speak to this woman. So
Amazing.
Sheikh Fuad set it up, yeah, and
Yeah.
got the contact data, and then we went there. And it was very interesting because at first she was a little bit apprehensive, like, what's this white guy doing here with his archery? And then she said, okay, so what have you learned? So I didn't have a bow with me, but I showed her my posture, and she's like, this is wrong and that's wrong. And
Yeah.
your teacher is rubbish. And I said, yeah, I don't have a teacher. What do you mean you don't have a teacher?
Right.
Well, how do you learn this? So then I had this folder with all these old photographs of Manchu archers and old texts and stuff. Like, yeah, I've been working from this. And she's like, this is all you have? Yeah. Okay, yeah, then it's actually okay. Yeah, then I can understand. And then she was then
Correcting
she
you.
became, yeah, really interested. Like, oh wow, this guy is really interested. He doesn't have a teacher.
Right.
So she was yeah, putting my body in the right position, telling me about the thumb ring, and yeah, it was
Excellent.
quite a, yeah, an interesting meet. And at that time, I never thought I would speak to a living Manchu archer. So it was really interesting to ask all these little questions like, so how about this? What about that? And
Excellent. Yeah.
get
Yeah.
some
That's
more clarity.
it's one of the golden opportunities if we can find people who lived in that age or actually know firsthand, have
Yeah,
experience in and know, because then it trumps any history book or anything written down. We have it firsthand from the person's mouth, and we know it's 100% true.
yeah, yeah.
And so, just moving on to your website. So the last Manchu Archer. Just tell us about this as well. Who's this guy, and where you met him, etc.
Oh yeah, no, this was the lady actually. Yeah, Cuckoo.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So
This was the lady. Okay, got you. Sorry.
yeah. Her father died a long time ago. He was actually quite old, I think in his 60s when she was born. So
Oh,
yeah,
oh, this is her in the picture.
yeah,
That's her.
yeah,
Right,
exactly.
right, right. Wow.
And it's
Amazing.
interesting. You see this follow through that her arm is up like that,
Yes.
which is exactly the same as a drawing from 1722
Mm,
describing the archery of the Imperial Guard under Kangxi. So you see a continuous tradition from
mm.
1722 to 1957.
Yeah, amazing.
And
Very, very,
I
very much like the I guess the Hungarian style where they release and they also let their hand out as well,
yeah,
right? Something similar to
yeah.
that.
And I asked about it because you see on photos different release styles.
Mm,
And she said like, oh yeah, that's just, it's not really important. It's just a matter of school. So our lineage did it like this and other schools did it like that.
yeah.
And she said the most important thing is what happens right after release. And what happens after that is just a matter of style and honoring your teacher.
Sure. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Got you.
yeah, it was quite
Yeah.
interesting to hear that from her because there's so much controversy about it. Like this is bad, that is good. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Wow. This is her. Yeah. Amazing.
yeah, yeah,
Wow.
she was very fit still, very active.
Mm, mm. Excellent. No, it's great to document when you meet these people. Document their experience and things that they've
Mm,
done. So
yeah,
she's fixing your hand position here on the bow.
yeah.
Excellent. Did she have a lot of bows in her collection, or did she have a lot of archery stuff, or not?
Nothing there, unfortunately. She had everything. She had a house in Shanghai as well, and
Uh,
everything was still there. So we met in Singapore,
right.
and she said like, "Oh yeah, it's all in storage, and I haven't looked at them for decades."
Wow. I bet you must have been like, please show me some, and you wanted to maybe um, it would be something that you could even trade in or something like that.
Yeah, would have been nice, but yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Mhm.
And this is her, I guess, her motto on the wall: early to bed, early to rise, stay healthy and wise. Right?
Yeah.
This is a Chinese saying? I have heard it before, but I'm not sure if it's a Western saying or it's probably a Chinese saying. No.
Yeah, I guess it is. I don't really know where it originated.
Mm, mm. But I think in the English it rhymes. I don't. Does it rhyme in the Chinese? I'm not sure.
um, yeah, here it does
Oh,
actually.
it does.
Yeah,
Okay, good.
yeah.
Okay. So the Manchus, are they the latter end of kind of the Chinese archery civilization? They coming at near the end, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm. Um, okay. One other question that we had here. So, what kind of information have you found in the Qing Dynasty official documents? Is it specific or just generalizations, like so many archers made a platoon? I don't know if that
Mm.
makes sense.
Yeah, you pretty much can find anything. So you can indeed find organization of the army in platoons and regiments and everything. But there's also lists of, for example, bow types, arrow types. There's one book that speaks of 64 types of different arrows and why they're made like this, what did they shoot, like what animals or what kind of armor they need to pierce. And there are these texts made for the workshops that go in detail, like for a 100-pound bow, you need so much horn, so much sinew, so much glue. The bowyer takes 2 days to shape the parts and like up until the tiniest details. So yeah, it's quite a nice and full picture. There's still some gaps here and there of things that I would like them to be more clear. But of course, a lot of it was also common knowledge, especially for the boyars.
Mm-hmm.
So some things were not deemed interesting enough to write down. Just like how we tie our shoelaces, there might be someone in 100 years looking at photos like, why didn't everybody describe
Yeah.
it? And we find it so boring, and everybody knows about it.
True.
So
Yeah, no, it's interesting. That's a good point. Something that's so mundane and normal to
yeah,
us in the future could be something like, oh, wow, they had laces on their shoes and this is the technique. And everyone is trying to learn different techniques of that. Yeah, very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. Yeah, so the Manchu bow is also very because of the long ears. It
Mm,
needs a lot of maintenance to keep them straight, because if one is
mm,
out of alignment, the bow will pull itself apart. And
ah,
there's not a word about maintenance in any of these texts, because that was mundane to them. Like, yeah, you just straighten your bow, right?
right,
Everybody does that.
right,
Yeah,
right,
it's not
right.
worth mentioning. Everybody knows.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's a standard thing.
yeah,
Um, one interesting thing you mentioned about, the warriors had to be all round, had to be skillful in many different disciplines. So, wrestling and horse riding and archery. I guess sword fighting as well, because they had to know hand-to-hand combat, right?
yeah, yeah. Surprisingly little survives. So the interesting thing is there's this dictionary of the 1790s, and it has all these chapters. So there's a chapter military matters, and then all these chapters are aligned in importance. So the first is archery on horseback, then is archery on foot, then it's hunting. Interesting enough, because hunting was seen as a preparation for war, like chasing these hares and shooting them. And then was wrestling, because as a horse people, if you get close enough to another horseman, you jump on him and you end up on the ground. So that's your main martial art. Nothing about swordsmanship. So that's how low they actually valued it. They all had the saber, and they're
That's
pretty
very
much,
interesting. Because when we
yeah,
think of Chinese martial arts, it's like wushu sword comes out and all this, but it's interesting that that's maybe not so much the focus.
yeah, very interesting. And what I think was also the case is that it was, unlike archery and wrestling, it wasn't uniform. So the army would just hire a local martial artist that was really good.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why they didn't say, oh, this is the cut like this and the cut like that, because it depended on where you were. And they would just take the best guy at the time for this kind of training.
Yeah. Peter, what do you know about Muslims in China and their impact on archery or their involvement in archery and martial arts?
Mm. Yeah, there's this group, the Hui, and they live mostly in Xinjiang. And they actually became, a lot of them became part of the Qing army. And what's interesting is they're the ones now that still do the strength training that was from the Qing imperial examinations. There's some videos on YouTube that
Oh,
they
really?
still
Wow.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
But as far as archery is concerned, when the Qing was going on, when these people are described, they're mostly described as musketeers and lancers, also in old depictions. So it seems the whole world actually, samurai, the Janissaries, everybody moved to firearms, and the Manchus were really the odd ones out that still clung to the bow. So in the Qing, you don't have a lot of reference to archery from other people. I think in the Ming, you may find some more references about these Muslim archers. But there were,
Interesting.
yeah, in many cases, there were either an integral part of the military, or there are also the ones that were not under the Qing often rebelled against the Qing. So there was also some tension here and there.
Right. Was there any issues with them being with their belief as Muslims and following the emperor or anything like that?
Surprisingly, the Qing was very much open-minded.
Mm.
I think more so than today. So, to give you an example, the Qing Emperor Manchu, he had a Muslim concubine, one of his favorite wives, and he built a mosque for her next to the palace, so she could pray according to her traditions.
Wow, amazing. Right.
Yeah, and so he didn't even want his wife to have the same religion as he did. So that's how open-minded and inclusive they were, and that's also, I think, part of their success. That when they traveled to a Muslim area or a Mongol area, they didn't expect them to treat the emperor in a certain way. The emperor would dress like them, and act like them.
Wow,
And,
very interesting.
yeah, and perform rituals like them. So he was portraying himself as the emperor for all the people instead of uh,
An
this guy that
oppressive
everybody needs.
tyrant or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. So it felt for a lot of these people, it felt more like an alliance. For example, the Tibetans sometimes had problems with a Mongol group that was invading them. So then the Qing came to help them fight it.
Mm-hmm.
And then Tibet became part of the Qing, but not in an oppressive way, but more like, you belong to us now.
Yeah.
We'll get your back if anybody attacks you.
Yeah, they were part of them willingly rather than being forced.
Yeah, yeah. And when the Qing fell, issues arose because now the new government claims the borders of the old empire, but not the ideology. And I think that's why you now see tensions in Xinjiang and Tibet, because they're like, well, we were part of China, but not under these conditions.
Right. Yeah. So if we're talking about the imperial guard, or the kind of the elite, army forces, what type of people would they be made up of? Or people around the emperor, protecting the emperor, his personal guard. Would they be men and women mixed, or is it just men? Would they be from a particular certain background, or a race, or where would they be from?
Yeah, they would be primarily drawn from the Manchu banners. So you had this system of banners. Every Manchu was born under one of the 8 banners, 8 colored flags. So you could be a Manchu of the white banner, for example. And you had the upper 3 banners. So there was yellow, bordered yellow, and white. And these were the families that have been historically closely aligned to the emperor. You could call them maybe hereditary nobility. And a lot of the imperial guards were drawn from these because these families had long-standing ties and they were powerful families. So their loyalty was unquestionable. But it could be that you were in a lower banner, like the blue banner, and you did some amazing things in the field, and the emperor heard about it, and he was like, I want this guy to be my personal guard. And this is usually when careers picked up, because you had about 6,000 of these imperial guards, and an inner circle of maybe 40 of them were really close to the emperor. So close that they went hunting together and they accompanied them in the entirety of his life. So when there was trouble at the border, he would send one of these imperial guards as an interim manager, sometimes to take over the whole province.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And if those imperial guards turn up, everyone knows, right, this person is very close to the emperor, so they need to listen to him.
Yeah, they were like superstars.
Right.
So they would bring
Celebrities.
the latest. Yeah, so they would bring the latest fashion from Beijing, and when they went to a camp in, let's say, Sichuan, the local soldiers would write about it, like, wow, have you seen his boots, and have you seen the saber? And you can see there's a trickle-down effect, just like today with Instagram influencers, that in the years after they saw a guy like that, their fashion would become closer to the imperial guard. It's really interesting.
Wow.
But they were mostly men, actually exclusively men. There were a lot of Manchu women that could shoot a bow and were martial, especially before the Qing, because the men would go out on a ring hunt and the women would take care of the camp.
Yeah.
And whenever the hunt was unsuccessful for consecutive months, other settlements would try to steal food from others. So there would constantly be a threat of war. So Manchu women historically were quite capable of fighting. But once they became the Qing dynasty, they became more like housewives, but never like the Chinese. So foot binding was illegal for Manchus. So they did have a separate culture that was a little bit more masculine than the average Asian lady.
Yeah. Was you mentioned the foot binding? Is that something that was quite prevalent, quite common?
Among Chinese, it was very common. And at some point, even some Manchus started to do the practice just to get a sense of belonging with the Chinese elite. But the emperor never liked it, and officially it was outlawed. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's
so it was really
that's a good thing, I guess.
Yeah, it was really an older Chinese aesthetic that was linked to if you can have a wife with feet like that, it means she doesn't have to work. So it was a very strange way of showing off your place in society.
Very strange, yeah, very strange.
Manchus did it by growing their nails very long, Manchu women, to show that they didn't have to do any handwork.
Oh,
It's
really?
a
Wow. Okay.
slightly less painful way of showing. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. A couple of last questions before we wrap up, because I'm sensitive of the time. Stephen started the ATARN website, and he did kind of say he's kind of passed the torch to yourself. Do you have any update about? And I know you're super busy, but is there any update that people can know about the website itself?
Yeah. Yeah. So I have this new Mandarin Mansion website, and I told my development team to actually use this framework because it took 2 years to build this framework to showcase articles about culture and about objects. So I was like, hey, this framework, I can reuse it for ATARN. So the framework is now nearly done. And what we then need to do is to migrate all the old content to the new site. And we're going to start with young researchers to add new research to it. So I have a couple of people lined up that are now working on articles that we will eventually publish there. And the idea in the long run, I hope we're there by next year, is to have some sort of an online magazine covering the latest serious research on archery. And we are hoping that this will also uplift the level of discourse in, for example, the ATARN group, that will become more research-minded. And it's okay to disagree with these researchers, but then write a paper and have the community look at it. So it will be like peer-reviewed, so we can actually advance the knowledge instead of going around in circles. What often happens on social media, you have to reinvent the wheel like every month.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're explaining the same thing to different people.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
So the site will be an anchor of this is what we know today. This is how far research has gone, and we can venture further. But then we need to use the scientific method and come up with.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, I mean, just for the record, it's we appreciate all the effort you're putting into continuing the ATARN website, and I think right now it's probably the main hub and resource that traditional archers and people into traditional archery are going to for information and things like that. So, I know that you've already got a lot on your plate, but actually putting time and effort and money, I guess, into updating it is much appreciated. So thank you for that. Okay, just a couple of last questions before we finish. I've done this with a few of the other interviews. It's kind of just some fun, quick fire questions.
Sure.
Do you prefer to shoot laminate or composite bow? I mean, I don't know if they're making laminate Manchu bows, but I mean, do you prefer to shoot a laminate or a composite?
I have experience with both, but now since I could afford it, I found a good buyer. I only shoot composites. And the main reason is that I've always gotten into archery to understand these old cultures.
Yeah.
So I want to deal with the problems a Manchu archer had to deal with, like the twist in the bow and all this kind of thing. And also when I shoot a certain draw weight, I want to know what it does in composite. And a laminate becomes more efficient earlier. So like a 60-pound laminate will perform better actually than a 60-pound traditional Manchu bow. But when you get to the higher weights, the composite will take over and become more efficient.
Yeah.
So basically, because I want to relive history, I mainly take to composites.
Sure.
But
okay.
I would say if you want to start Manchu archery just because you like the tradition, laminates are a lot more practical.
No, other bows have said very much the same thing with the laminates. They're more efficient up to about maybe 50, 60 pounds. And then after that, the composites take over. I do ask people maybe who have done horse archery, like what is their favorite track to shoot on? But I guess you haven't done too much of that, or have you?
No, I've trained it for maybe a year. My ex-girlfriend was a pretty good horse rider. So I taught her archery. She taught me to ride the horse.
Oh, excellent.
But I found it was very difficult to pick up later in life, horsemanship. I have a lot of respect for people that can do it. But,
absolutely. No, it helps to be young and supple. When you're a bit older and things are creaking, then it's not so much good. Okay, do you prefer wood or carbon arrows? Probably an obvious question, but wood or carbon?
Mainly wood, but I also really like Korean bows and Korean archery. And it's nice to just have a bundle of cheap carbon arrows for everyday practice. But it's always more special to shoot with a nice bamboo arrow.
Absolutely. absolutely.
Mm.
Another silly question, maybe. Okay, other than a Manchu bow, what would be your bow of choice to shoot?
Yeah, that will be Korean,
Mm.
and I love it because it's yeah, almost the exact opposite of a Manchu bow.
It is, yes, indeed, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
small, light, made for speed. And you could say the Ottoman bow is also fits that bracket,
Mm-hmm.
but the Ottoman bow has a short draw length, and I'm used to drawing as far as I can.
Ah,
And
right, okay,
the
yeah.
Korean bow allows me to have a kind of a similar technique.
Mm,
The hand and the hand positions are different, but
mm,
at
mm,
least the body posture is similar. So
mm.
it's more familiar to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I was speaking to Yuhua, and he was saying even some of his short bows, they can actually be pulled quite far, but I guess not as far as a Manchu, because you've got maybe a 34, 35-inch arrow or something, right?
Mm. Yeah, the Manchu bow, at least for me, has an unlimited draw length. So there's never this wall that
Yes.
stops. I think most of them can go at least to 36 inches.
Wow.
I pull maybe 33, 34. If the bow gets heavier, I don't get past 32 because everything seems to be compressed.
Yes, yes, sure, sure. Okay, last question, which is more of a theoretical, fun question. If you were able to time travel, go back into time, which era or archery era would you most like to relive?
Mm. I would go straight back to the court of Kangxi, the Kangxi emperor, who was ruling the late 17th, early 18th century. And obviously, I choose the Qing because I've spent so much time studying them that you want to fill in all the details. But I think a lot of eras would be very interesting. Mughal India is one of the eras as well. But what I've read from Kangxi is that he was just a fantastic person himself. Like he was really into archery. He shot 170-pound bows. Apart from being an emperor, and sometimes have to answer 500 letters in a day. So this guy was an all-round scholar and warrior. But he was very curious. He sometimes went into peasants' close to a village to ask farmers, like, "What's your daily life like? What can be improved?"
Mm,
And he invited scholars from France and from Italy to teach him about mathematics, about the stars, and to see if the sciences could be combined. Like, what do we not know yet that Europeans know?
mm,
Super open-minded, humble man
mm.
who knew his stuff about archery. So if there's one person to meet, it would be him, and I'm sure he would like to meet someone from our time as well, like
Yeah,
a
sure.
guy from the future. Bring him on. So
Well,
yeah, it would be
it sounds like we could do with a leader like that today, in some of our
yeah,
countries,
yeah,
judging by what's going on. But yeah, no, that'd
yeah,
be super interesting. And it's interesting to see that how open-minded some of these emperors were at that time.
yeah, yeah. He would also go on campaign, for example. So there was this guy who was constantly fighting Mongol tribes at the border, and they were allied to the Qing. And he warned this leader a couple of times. So it was an expanding Mongol empire. And at some point, he said, "Okay, let's just send an expedition, but I'm going to join." And everybody at court was against this because it happened before in the Ming that an emperor actually got kidnapped by the Mongols. So it wasn't without danger. And at some point, he wrote like, "I've never lived so frugally, but I've also never been so happy." And he was making drawings of the plants he saw on the way. And at some point, food ran out, and he said, "Me and the men, we only eat one bowl of rice every 3 days. But I think I should suffer along with them. I don't want to give them orders that I don't live through." And,
Right, right, excellent.
you can see
True
the
leadership.
humble. Yeah, yeah.
True leadership.
Really interesting guy. And I think his son and his grandson still had a lot of that. And after that, the dynasty really fell into decadence and
Right, right.
crumbled. But
Yeah,
yeah, that was a really good time in Chinese history, I think, with the right leader
excellent.
at the right place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Excellent. Okay, Peter, we're going to wrap it up there. I really appreciate your time. I know I was really bugging you a lot to get an hour or two, so I apologize for that, but it was definitely worth it. I hope people who are watching this will benefit from it and will see the true value that you bring to the archery world. We appreciate all your effort and time you're putting in to not just your work, but contributing to the rich landscape of the archery world that we have today. You're certainly a pivotal person in making things happen and pushing correct research out there and maintaining high standards. So I think in a previous life you were probably born as a Manchu archer, and you're just now in a different body. But we appreciate your time. Thank you very much. We will direct people to the websites that we've looked at, and then hopefully when the new ATARN site is up, we'll promote that as well. So once again, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, and also sorry from my side that it took so long to get an appointment, but it's a really strange time because what I do is actually someone else's hobby.
Yeah.
And with the lockdown, everybody started to focus on collecting more.
Right.
So my inbox is flooded. Like I'm behind 120 mails at this moment.
Wow,
So
wow.
yeah.
Well, at least the COVID was something good for you, I guess.
Yeah, I guess in a strange way, because yeah, at first of course you think this is something nobody needs, so I'm gonna feel it, but luckily not.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate what you said. For me, I'm always trying to find out more and work with people that like to do research, and it's really nice that it comes across as that I actually add value to the community.
Absolutely, 100%, 100%. Okay, Peter, until we meet again at some point, all the best. Take care, and we'll speak to you soon.
Cool, will do.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.